welcome to another episode of Taylor Time. Thank you so much for being here, of course. And this episode is special because this is my official birthday episode. I'm turning 15 years old. And you know, when you turn 15, you start to think of turning 16. And when you turn 16, you know, in Virginia, you can drive. So I'm very, very, very excited because basically in about a year from now or so, I'll be driving. So I'm very, very happy. But in this episode, we're going to be making a Korean lunchbox cake. And many people don't know what it is, but if it's not really registering in your mind, it kind of is how it sounds. It's basically like a little mini cake, and it's made to fit like in a lunchbox. And typically it's about 4 inches round, but this time we're going to make it just a little bit bigger so we can share it with more people. And so I think that's it. All right, let's start. So the flavor of this cake is going to actually be a lemon cake with a strawberry filling. So I'm going to show you guys how I make my filling, but also keep in mind that you can make this any flavor. It doesn't have to have a filling. It doesn't have to be lemon. It can be any flavor, and you can share it with all your friends. So I'm going to show you guys how I make my homemade strawberry jam, which this recipe can be substituted for blueberries, cherries, peaches, basically any kind of fruit you can think of. But to start with this, I'm going to end up starting with my strawberries, and I'm putting this in a pan just so it'll cook faster, but you can also put it in a pot if you're making a larger amount. And so I like to use frozen strawberries, but of course you can use fresh. Both of them work the exact same in the jam, but usually when I have orders, I usually like to use frozen because they last longer and I can use it for multiple orders. So that's good if you bake often. And so now I'm going to end up adding my sugar. And then I'm going to add my lemon juice. And what the lemon juice does is the acidity kind of balances out the sweetness, and it kind of brings out the flavor a little bit more with the strawberries because we don't want it to be too sweet. So a little bit of lemon juice will definitely help to balance it out because you have the cake, you have the buttercream, and you have the jam. So you don't want it to be overly sweet. All right, and now we can add our water. And end up saving a little bit. The water is just to help to loosen the mixture and get it nice and smooth. And then we're going to add just a little bit of lemon extract. And again, that's just to help with the flavor. You can also add strawberry extract to this as well. And then this. A lot of people don't know exactly what this is called, but what I'm about to make is actually called a slurry. And so what that is, it's basically cornstarch and water mixed together, and it's typically used in jams or fruit curds or different fillings to help thicken it up. I'm going to mix my water and my cornstarch together. I'm going to use this spoon. I'm going to make sure there's no chunks, just so we get a super smooth mixture. All right, so for this mixture, you want to put this on the heat on about medium heat or so, medium high, somewhere in between there. And you want to make sure you use a whisk to stir it up so it doesn't burn. And once it gets to a simmer, you should let it go for about 5 minutes or so. And once you see the strawberries break down, you see the sugar melt, that's when you want to add your slurry, your cornstarch mixture, so that way it can start to thicken and nothing burns. So be very careful. Make sure you consistently stir because it can burn very, very easily, even if you take your eye off of it for a second. So once that's done, you want to let it cool, and then we can use it in our cake. All right, so now we can get to the part where we assemble this cake. And so here I have my lemon cake, and I'm only using one layer, like one little cake pan, because I don't want it to be too high. It still has to fit in the lunchbox container. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my serrated knife. Be very careful with these. Always be very careful with anything sharp. And so what these do, like the serrated pieces on it, it's mainly used for like bread and different cakes, and so it makes it easier to like salt into the cake, so you get like a cleaner cut basically. And so now I'm gonna kind of use the edge of my pan as a guide to get my cake nice and level. And I'm just gonna use my turntable, and there we go. You just want to continue to spin the cake until you've gone all the way through the layers. And if you have to go slow and steady, that's perfect. Do what you have to do. That's how we learn, and you don't have to go so fast, and you don't have to, you know, try and get it on the first try. So here we go. I'm gonna save this for later. All right, so the top of our cake is nice and leveled. And so I had already went around the edges just to pry it from the cake pan to make it easier. And now I can just flip it over. And so now I'm gonna end up layering this into 2 layers. You can do 2 layers, 3 layers. You can make the layers as thin or as thick as you like it to be. But I'm just gonna do 2 because I don't wanna make the cake too high, but then I also wanna have some room for our filling. So what I like to do to level my cakes is I like to use my knife and kind of go around the cake using my Lazy Susan and kind of not cutting directly into the middle of the cake and going all at once, but kind of going around and making a guide. And then we can go around the cake again and cut directly into the cake. Let's take some focus, guys. All right, there we go. Okay, we did it. All right, I'm so excited. These layers look really good. And now I'm gonna end up simple syruping these layers. Again, if you forgot what simple syrup is, it's basically just a mixture of half water and half sugar boiled together and cooled. And so putting this in our cakes is gonna help to keep it moist. You know, with being in the fridge, especially with decorated cakes, they have to go in and out of the fridge, they have to sit out for a while. So this is gonna help to make, you know, the cake nice and moist. So that way we're not disappointed when we finally cut into the cake and we're excited to eat it and the cake is dry. We don't want that at all. So I'm gonna take my simple syrup, and what I did to this simple syrup is I actually used lemon juice instead of water. I like to usually infuse the ingredients of my cake into the simple syrup. So if I'm doing like a strawberry cake, I'll put some strawberries in here and then strain it once it's done. But then for this, instead of using water, I just substituted that for some lemon juice. All right, so I have my buttercream here, and I actually have it in a piping bag to make decorating a little bit easier. And so you can dye your buttercream any color, or you can use white, or you can make tie-dye buttercream. You can make basically anything, but I'm gonna make green just because I feel like it'll kind of go with the other toppings I have. So stay tuned for those because this cake is gonna look really, really pretty. And so I'm going to use a little buttercream to kind of glue down my cake so it doesn't slide around. And now I'm going to put a little buttercream on my cake and smooth it out with my offset spatula. And doing this before you put down any kind of filling, it's gonna kind of create like a barrier between the cake and the filling because you know cake is a sponge, so it's gonna soak up any kind of moisture you have. And so we wanna keep the filling in between the layers and we don't want the cake to, you know, soak it in. As delicious as that sounds, it sounds great, but as far as cutting into the cake, we wanna see that beautiful filling in the center. Alrighty, and so now I'm gonna end up taking my buttercream and I'm just gonna make like a little ring around the edge so that way when we add our jam in the middle, it won't like, you know, squish out the sides, because after doing all that hard work, we don't need anything to be ruined. So I'm just gonna take my Lazy Susan and pipe a ring around the cake. I'm gonna pipe one more just to make it a little taller, just to make sure we have our jam nice and secured. All right, there we go. All right, and now here I have my strawberry jam, and it's cooled and it's been made. I'm gonna give it a little stir. I'm gonna end up putting some of this in the center. The tricky thing about fillings is that if you add too much, it's gonna spill out the sides. So be very careful when you're doing this. And I know, you know, a lot of filling, it always sounds good in the cake. It always does. But sometimes you gotta be kind of light-handed. There we go. And now we can add our second layer of cake. Okay. Looks good. Make sure it's center. All right, and so I'm just gonna take the rest of my buttercream and kind of fill in this gap around the cake. All right. And now I can crumb coat my cake and just lock in all the crumbs so that we get a beautiful layer of icing at the end. Whenever you're icing a filled cake, you always want to make sure to be very careful that you don't slide it around too much, because then the layer is going to start to slide and the jam will fall out, and that's happened to me before and it's not very fun. So I'm just warning you guys to help you guys out. Okay, so we have our crumb coat done and our cake is nice and filled. I'm gonna pop this in the blast chiller for maybe about 7 minutes or so, but you can pop it in the fridge as well for about maybe, I'd say 20 to 25 minutes since it is a smaller cake. But yes, once you touch it at the end, there should be no buttercream on your fingers, and that's how you know it's chilled. All right, so we have our cake out of the fridge, and now I'm gonna do my final coat of icing. And I'm just gonna go over the cake the same way I did with the crumb coat, except it's just gonna be a thicker layer where you can't see any cake. All right, and so once I have like my base layer of icing on here, I can go around the cake with my bench scraper and smooth it out super smooth. Okay, so the icing on our cake is nice and smooth, and so I'm just gonna drag in the edges of the cake to get it nice and clean, but usually I like to let the cake chill just like this with a little bit of buttercream around the edge, and once it's super chill and the frosting is nice and hard and solid, I like to go ahead and take a knife and just cut around the edge, because that way it's like a super simple like cheat way of getting like super sharp edges instead of having to go over it over and over again. But we're gonna end up putting like a little frosting design on the edge, and so therefore this time it doesn't really matter. So we have a free pass, we get to save ourselves that extra step. So I'm gonna do just the way I did with the crumb coat. Just drag in the edges. It also helps that the cake is cold from the crumb coat, because then like the buttercream gets a little bit solid anyways, so the edges are still pretty sharp. All right, so our cake looks good. And I'm gonna put this back in the blast chiller for about 7 more minutes, or in the fridge for about 20-25 minutes or so that way we can go back and we can start assembling our cake and decorating it in our lunchbox. Okay, so now we have our cake cooled, and this looks like a whole like craft project because basically it kind of is. It's very fun. And so I think I decided on the color pink because I think it'll go really well with the green. And also, fun fact, my mom's birthday is actually 3 days before my birthday. And so her favorite colors are green and pink. So I'm kind of doing this in honor of both of us. This is kind of both of our episodes. Oh my gosh, I can't even talk. But this is both of our birthday episodes. And so I'm gonna use some pink tissue paper. I'm gonna put it at the bottom of my little lunch tray. You can use like a real lunchbox, you can use a lunch tray, you can even get some really cute ones online, but I think I'm gonna be using this because like our cake is gonna be like the main attraction, so we don't need anything too fancy with the box. And so now I'm gonna take my tissue paper and cut it into pieces. All right, and so before I put my pieces of tissue paper in there, I think I'm actually going to take a few pieces of paper towel, and this is going to help make sure we don't have to use too much tissue paper at the bottom. It's going to kind of like fill these little spaces right here. If you don't have these spaces, and you don't have to do this step, but if you do, then this is probably the easiest and cheapest way to do it. It also gives our cake like a little bit of a support system, you know, so it doesn't have all this texture at the bottom and it doesn't move around when you're trying to transport. Alrighty, and now I'm just gonna take my pieces, and you can kind of layer these in here however you'd like. I'm gonna kind of scrunch it up a little bit. You can even get really creative with this step, and you can use like different colors. You can even use like the paper that you see in like Easter baskets. You can put that in there. You can put glitter. You can put confetti. You can put anything. It's basically like it's yours. You can customize it as much as you want to, and that's why it's so fun. All right. So I'm going to be very careful with this step. And finally put my cake in the center. Perfect. All right, it looks very cute. I'm going to take a little more and just kind of stuff it into the sides to make it look all cute and kind of fill in the edges a little bit. Okay. All right, I think we got enough tissue paper in there. It's looking really good. Ooh, whoops, it's okay. I kind of dug into the cake a little bit with my finger, but it's okay because the edges, we're gonna put a little icing design on there, so it doesn't even matter. Alrighty, I'm gonna put this back on my turntable to make it a little easier. And now, here I just have some plain white classic buttercream in a piping bag. And I have a star tip on the end. And so I'm gonna do like a little bit of like a swirl design on the edge. I'm actually, you know what, I'm gonna practice on this paper towel really quick. Make sure I got my technique down. All right. I think I got it. All right, let's see. All right, there we go. All right, good. Okay, so we have our cake nice and iced on the edge. Ooh, oops, okay, gotta be careful. Ooh, all this hard work. Okay, so now I just have some lovely little sprinkles, and these kind of go with the rest of my colors. These sprinkles have like green, they also have pink, and so I think it's gonna make our cake tie in together very nicely. I'm gonna sprinkle these on the edge. All right. And so now I'm gonna add my own little touch. And you know, when I think of birthdays, I think of ice cream sundaes. And you know, ice cream sundaes, they have cherries and stuff. And so I think if I added a few cherries, it would kind of give off like, you know, that birthday vibe, you know? So I'm gonna end up adding a few cherries. Okay. This looks really good. This looks very good. I'm so happy with the colors that I chose, with the pink and the green. Thank you, Mama, because this looks amazing right here. It looks just like a birthday cake. And so, our last and final step is I'm gonna write happy birthday on this cake. And so, this is a part where I get kind of nervous because, you know, this is the part where you can either make or break the cake. So, kind of rhymed. So I have some white buttercream here in the piping bag. And so what this is on the end, it's actually like an interchangeable piping tip kind of conjunction, I guess. And so what it does is basically you put the piping tip on top and then you screw the piping little couplet thingy on the top. So that way you can change your piping tip without having to change your piping bag a million times, and it makes it a lot easier, and it makes the mess a lot easier to manage as well. So for this part, I want to go very, very slow. I got to be very careful with this. Okay, I did it. I finally did it. Okay. All right, so this is the final Korean lunchbox cake. It's perfect. It's the perfect size to bring to work, the perfect size to bring to school, perfect size for any kind of event. And it's so cute and it's customizable. And this cake is different because it was like a 2-in-1. And so you got to do like a whole craft project and you got to do a whole cake. So this is absolutely amazing. And so I would just love to say happy birthday to my mom and happy birthday to myself, Taylor Pouchet. And so I'm really gonna enjoy this 15th birthday with this cake. And so, yeah. All right, and so of course, as you all know, this wouldn't be a Taylor Time episode without me trying my cake. The cake is so pretty. I don't want to mess it up. I'm going to still eat it. But it's so pretty, I don't want to mess it up. But I'm going to try anyways. It's my birthday cake. I definitely deserve this. Oh yeah, lemon cake. One of my faves. My favorites. But this bite is in honor of my mom's birthday and my birthday, of course. Delicious as always. I worked super hard for this cake, so I definitely deserve this. But thank you so much for watching this episode. I hope you make this cake, and that's it. See you guys later. Bye.